What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the TDR show. Me and Jay are back with you, and we got a little Dynasty episode today, and we're talking Dynasty Mythbusters. So, fact or fiction on some of these myths out there and common Dynasty takes. We want to do a little bit of a different show tonight just because I'm done listening to like Dynasty Buys and all that kind of stuff that we've been hearing. Like we've been doing it too, but we wanted to kind of talk about theory because I think theory is more important in Dynasty sometimes. That's where the edge is at. We've talked about that plenty of times. And so we kind of went through and said, okay, hey, we crowdsourced a little bit out there on social media in our Discord. We said, hey, what are some great like Dynasty takes out there that you see, or maybe not so great takes that you think is the truth? Like you should live there. It's a myth. Like, hey, I don't think that's true at all. Or maybe it's in between. So we kind of looked at this. We're going to go over like team building myths, trade tools. You know, what is those Dynasty calculators, the ones we even have built at our Patreon, running back kind of myths out there, consistency and Superflex myths. So we're going to chat it up. We're going to talk about it, look at the data and see, you know, what myths out there are busted and which ones are actually kind of real. So stick with us, hit that like and subscribe button, and we'll catch you guys on the other side. All right, Jay, before we get into the actual myth here to start it off, do you believe in myths, or are you a guy here with Dynasty like yes set in stone on some of these things, or are you a more fluid guy with your spreadsheets? Where are you at in terms of some of these myths, just in general, or like, you know, do you see some takes out there that you're like, I don't know if that's true as much as it like people like to say it is?
No, I kind of am always of the opinion that it's, you know, everything has a caveat, everything has an if to it, everything can be more fluid to things, and and personally what I've always felt that I should try and do is those things that people feel are for sure. I like to try and figure out if there's any way those things that are for sure might be a little bit wrong or could be caveated somehow along the way. So I definitely think things are a little bit fluid. But the one thing that I would say is, you know, when data people get their hands on stuff and look at the spreadsheets and stuff like that, and they use correlations and stuff like, all they're saying is higher probability. Now, if somebody takes that to a point of like this will happen because of those things, that's definitely not what you should be looking at. It's mostly the data stuff is mostly like, well, you have the highest probability if you kind of do it this way because of correlations or whatever, that kind of thing. That's what I would say on the data side. But for the most part, I would say it's always with the caveat. It's always with if then type of statements, and there might be things. There's hardly ever any tried true fast things, although there are a couple that we'll talk about.
All right, let's get into it. So we're going to start with team building myths first, kind of just general speaking of like, hey, you're building your Dynasty team. Here are some things that people sometimes say, and here are some people, you know, some things that maybe out there just ingrained in our mind in turn of rebuilds here. First question was from Jagger May, former, he used to be over there with us with Football Guys. He is now at Fast Draft. He's a great guy. Here's his question. You didn't try hard enough to win if you still have your first round picks. So this is the idea of like, if you want to win now, and maybe we're part of this problem too, because we talked about 2026 picks all summer saying, hey, sell, go out there and try to get that contention there. And the idea is if you hoard rookie picks or you're not trying to move them, then that means you're not trying enough to win. What do you think about this one?
Yeah, I think the basis of the question stems from you're, in the middle of the pack, or you're at the higher end of the pack when it comes playoff time, then you're at the trade deadline or you're getting close to playoffs and you have that first round pick and you can buy some production that gets you into the fantasy football championship somehow. Mm-hmm. I think that's what the stem of this question is. But what I'd say is from a dynasty perspective, that's not always the best call or the right call. I think that stems from this sort of like redraft mindset. As opposed to when you play Dynasty, it should sort of be that long-term mentality that you want to think about. You're not just thinking about this win this year. You're thinking about wins for the next 5 years. And if you're giving up your first-round pick that could turn into a Bijan Robinson or a Jamar Chase or a Jaden Daniels 2 years out, or even 1 year out at the back end of the first, somebody that could be incredibly useful, and you're giving away for a depreciating asset, you're not thinking about the long term, and it's not necessarily a guarantee that you spend that first round pick and you actually win.
Yeah.
There's still a chance where you could take that first round pick, spend it on somebody, and he gets injured, or the week that you need him to perform, he massively underperforms. He'll still be on your team and you could still use him for next year, but presumably you bought that sort of guy that aged and stuff. So my point here is that I think that my personal belief is that you want to make value added moves, even when you're in Dynasty, even when you're in win now. So when you're buying players, using that first round pick to go and win, buying players that will then appreciate in value as opposed to depreciate in value when you get there. But that doesn't mean you didn't try hard enough, because holding on to those picks generally tend to be pretty valuable as well. So I would say that sort of statement comes from this redraft mentality. People want to win this year, have to win this year, and it sort of disregards the value that you can create, where maybe you have a less of a chance winning this year, but the 3 or 4 years that come after that, maybe you set yourself up for a higher odds of winning those 3 years. Maybe you can string a couple wins together. Say you get a Jaden Daniels somehow on your squad or something like that with that first round pick that you held on to. So that's how I kind of think about it. How about you, Kevin?
No, I think that's an interesting point. I think that you made a good point about the depreciating and appreciating kind of asset. And, I've talked about that before. Like maybe you're buying somebody that's kind of a mid-tier asset, but one that you think could maybe appreciate and give you some value towards the end of your season when you're trying to still contend. Those are the perfect kind of buys. Like those are the guys that I really like. The ones I worry about is, like Alvin Kamara feels like a guy that a lot of people are buying right now for a late first. Like they think it's a late first, and that might happen. I love Alvin Kamara in terms of where he could be this year, but if he falls off, I mean, that's an aging running back that's falling off that may be on a new team next year, and now you're looking at a very depreciated asset that you can only get a second from. So I think that is a great point by you too. Like I think trying to figure out with for me in this theory or this idea, I think there's something in between, because I think you can be too cautious. I think that sometimes you want to hold on those picks, you hoard them, and you're like, hey, I can't move them there. And maybe you were one piece away, but I think that's one way to like, go to some of these websites we've talked to you guys about, Dynasty Daddy, some of these other things, and really look and see where your team is at. Total points. Hey, are you a 6th seed or 5th seed, but you have like the second most total points? Hey, you might be able to add an asset and then go try to win it, right? But if you're tailing in the playoffs and you feel like your team is like, this is a mid-tier team where it is going down, I might actually flip it and say you should probably try to sell, right? And then just kind of retool right there, do a little rebuild that season, and then the next year really go for it and then use some of those picks too. So I think it's very in between for me. I don't think I think it's fact and fiction. I think part of it is like, you either have to you're too cautious and now, go get that asset and try to go for those appreciating assets, those ones that maybe you're going to pop off down the stretch. Or sometimes you go all in on a guy, and sometimes it works out. I remember I traded a second for Derrick Henry 2 years ago in a league. Last year it worked out for me because I got Derrick Henry again as like almost a league winner. But there's been plenty of times where that doesn't work out, right? And so you have to be very careful with how you do that. But to me, this is a kind of a in between. I think it can be both fact and fiction here.
I think the timing matters so much. I mean, with your Alvin Kamara example, if you're buying Alvin Kamara before the season starts and you think that he's going to put you over the top, that's where I would have a problem with it.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're buying whoever, it doesn't have to be Alvin Kamara. It could be whoever the hot hand is right before the playoffs. And you're in the playoffs, you're going to make a shot and you can get that like tremendous amount of upside. Sure, I'd love to have the appreciating dynasty value, but also if you really think you got a shot at it and you want to try and make the win, that's the case. I just wouldn't do that over and over and over again, where you're getting rid of all of your first for your first for the next year, your first for the year after that, so 2 years out, those kinds of things. That's the kind of situation where you kind of can get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, 100%. All right, let's go to the next one. This is a fun one. So someone popped in and asked this question or said, hey, if you don't have a top 3 team, it's time to rebuild. So I do think this. So I think that, the idea of like where your team's at and knowing kind of how big your team is or how many points they've scored or where the deficiencies are, that's important. But I do think that in dynasty mode, is as managers get there, it always feels like people want to rebuild instantly. Like they just want to keep rebuilding and perpetually rebuilding. And I think that's a very, very valid fact. That's why I hate using the word rebuild. To me, it's either you contend or retool. Like I don't like rebuild. Like I don't even talk about it. I like to say you're going to retool it. You're going to retool. Don't fool down, tear it down. And I think this is a fact, like in terms of like the opposite side of it. So I think that if you have a team that's in the top half of like a 12-team league, so a six or higher, even 7, depending on total points, it's not time to rebuild. You can just retool it, right? Like if you're down there in the middle range and you're really kind of churning that roster really well, then I think the idea is like anything can happen once you make the playoffs. I truly believe that statement because I've had 6 seed teams win leagues, right? Like I've done that before in a league that I'm in with a bunch of analysts. I had a 7-team league because we have 7 teams that make the playoffs. My team took down a 2nd seed, the 1st seed, and the championship team because my team got hot. Right, the right guy got injured. The right running back is getting the volume. Like those things can happen. So I definitely think this is fiction. I don't think you need a top 3 team that's in the league the whole time to basically go. You don't have to rebuild at this point. Like go for it if you're in that top 6. Now be cognitive though. Like if your team's kind of a middling tier team, but I would never call it rebuild. Like I wouldn't sell the farm. I would look for those assets that I can kind of get off my roster that are depreciating, like Jay talked about, and go sell them to some of these contenders that think they have a shot, and then go tool it for next year and still not rebuild. Like rebuild's a dirty word to me in Dynasty. I hate that word because I think people get stuck in that ever churning rebuild roster for 4 years, and then they orphan the team and you never see them again.
Yeah. I completely agree with that perspective. The one thing I'd mention, and you mentioned Dynasty Daddy, but there's lots of ways to do this. Just because you are a 5th or 6th seed team does not mean that's where your team actually would be if there were no injuries, if there were no crazy weeks or anything like that. You could have a team that's really, really good, that's very capable of winning the whole thing, come in at a 6th seed because the 2 players got injured at the beginning of the season. You had a player get injured in the middle of the season, and now all of them are coming back, and you're starting to put up huge weeks. But you're still the 6th seed going against the 1 seed. There's situations where your 6th seed team is a very, very strong team. You're the player that passed that. The team that ends up in the 6th seed could be the 3rd overall team. In if you were actually looking at what kind of assets this team has and what kind of points per game potential or spike week potential that they have for the playoffs. So once you get in, like Kevin said, once you get in, anybody can take the championship home, and your odds are a little bit lower for 5 and 6 teams if you're looking at everything, but everybody still has a chance to get those spike weeks. So I teams that are in the 5th and 6th seeds, sort of middle of the pack, I think just like Kevin said, retool. If you can make those trades that are like dynasty value accruing through that process, get rid of the depreciating assets, buy the appreciating assets type of thing. But I wouldn't be too, anytime you're in the playoffs, you got a shot. But you could be realistic with what your team is. If you're a 8th, you're basically the 8th best team, but you snuck in and the playoffs because you outperformed what your team should have done, and you got the 6th seed, that's the one I want to be really cautious about. But if you're the 3rd best team and you just kind of underperform throughout the whole season and you ended up as the 6th seed, even though you're kind of middle of the pack, you're still a really, really good team. So if you could use the tools like Dynasty Daddy, some of those other ones out there, that kind of gives you an idea of the landscape of what all the other teams look like in the league, and from a dynasty perspective, how those will be valued and how those will appreciate over time. That 6th seed team, even though it finishes middle of the pack, could be the winner next year. So you just got to keep churning, kind of make those moves to kind of get yourself in a better spot so you have more shots at winning that championship next year. Maybe you get less injuries, maybe you get guys that increase their performance, increase their points per game, those types of things, to a team that already looks pretty good from that perspective.
And I would say this too, to your point, knowing where your team is at, know all right, understand your league settings. That should be simple, right? Everybody's gonna roll their eyes when they hear that. But where does your league value guys, right? So if it's a 2.0 tight end premium, or if it's Superflex 6-point passing touchdowns, 6-point rushing touchdowns, but let's say it's 1 point per carry, or 0.10, whatever it is per carry, whatever you guys decide, 0.1 per carry. And I would look and see, okay, look at my roster. Is the strength of my team where the points matter, right? Like if I have great tight ends, then I'm going to be more entitled not to rebuild or retool, because I know if it's 2 points, for tight end premium, but I have 3 top 10 guys, that gives me a distinct advantage. I don't need to move those guys. I might just need to retool a little bit some of the other roster and go. And that gives you the idea of like, all right, I have a good team based on these settings, right? Based on this roster, based on what it's looking like. So it's also that too. I think making sure, do you have any type of, when you're looking at your roster, where is your edge? Do you have any edge? And if you have an edge, then I don't necessarily think you need to rebuild at all, right? Or even retool. I think that you can kind of go with it. Now, if you don't have an edge, that's where you get into trouble. That's where you guys start retooling a little bit. All right, this next one I'm excited about because Jay's our calculator guy. So let's get into it. So this is trade and tool miss, but someone jumped in here and I knew it was coming. Trade calculators are good tools, but are they misused? So the question basically saying is, are they a good tool? First of all, and I think they are. So I think that's a fact. I think that they are good tools. We need them. People can crap on them all they want, but they use them. Every dynasty manager out there, analyst, they can say they don't, but they use some type of calculator. And I don't know. It doesn't have to be keep trade cut. It could be something out there. But are they misused? So what do you think about this one?
Great tool. And I do think they're misused. So I'll start with the answering the questions right away. But I think the calculators, the rankings, the stuff that like a keep trade cut, for example, that is an incredible resource to get sort of the market consensus. The problem with it, I'd say 2 problems with it. The market consensus is built up of everybody. So everybody's making these decisions, but it's not league specific. There's not league specific context in there. So you can maybe toggle between tight end premium. You can maybe, depending on how many starters you have, you don't know whether it's PPR or half point PPR or whatever. Like it's not specific to your exact league. And so you don't know how many players are going to start there. You don't know all those things when you're using them, but it does offer a frame of reference to start talks in negotiations with other dynasty managers. Mm-hmm. So you guys, we all have this ability to look at keep trade cut. Everybody's kind of going in and looking at it and being a part of that and seeing the trades and everything like that. So we've all built this consensus. So we all just have like ability to start from that spot when we talk about it. But it should not be used to sort of like finalize the deal. And what I say would misused is a lot of times managers try to use these calculators to win trades. And if that's going to be the case, then most of the time, you're probably not going to get a lot of trades done if you're doing it just to win the trade. What you need to do is try and figure out, here's where consensus is. This trade works out with consensus. How do I differ from consensus? Why is my value of Alvin Kamara, my value of Josh Jacobs, Aaron Jones, why is my value of those guys different than what consensus is? And that, once you get everybody to agree to a trade that's based on everybody's consensus values, that's how you win the trade. You don't win the trade by trying to gouge somebody based on the trade calculator. You win the trade by figuring out how you're different than consensus, and you make trades based on consensus. Now, it doesn't have to be the keep trade cut. You could think of it from ADP. So if you wanted to just look where players were based on ADP, sleeper ADP of all dynasty leagues, you can get that data and you can kind of try to value people based on, well, this guy normally goes in the 5th round and this guy normally goes in the 6th round. Well, I need somebody from this. You could do it that way too. And that's another way to look at consensus. It doesn't have to be keep trade cut. It doesn't have to be fantasy calc, although they are incredible resources and they give you, I think they're nicer than ADP because it adjusts quicker. Mm-hmm. You get more of a real-time mix to it. But that's what I would say is we misuse them because we're trying to win trades when we use them. And I don't think that's the way you should do it. I think the way that you should do it is use them to kind of frame the talks around how you want to approach the deal. And then think about, this is the consensus view. This is how we get a deal done. But in the back of your mind, you're thinking about, well, this is how I differ from consensus. This is how I can win it, because Alvin Kamara isn't worth this. He's worth actually this much higher piece of it. And yes, we got the deal done at that level, but I'm projecting in the future that I'm going to win this because I think he's worth a lot more than that from that perspective.
That's so with trades, and I think you're right in terms of the calculators and how you're doing it. I will explain my process with trade calculators. And just from like an analyst side, maybe, and maybe from the ranking side. So we just updated our rankings. We're gonna give those out to you this week. And I oh my god, I'm still bleeding. My eyes are still bleeding. But we ranked over. I think I finally ranked over 800 players, Devy and Dynasty combined, of what we did. One thing that I like to do is I like to go back. So I rank them first. I don't look at anybody's rankings. I don't look at, in terms of value or whatever things at. And then I go back and I say, okay, how far off consensus am I on some of these guys? And being off consensus is not a bad thing. So like, I don't change anything. But the one thing I do look for is I say, okay, so for example, my new updated rankings, and you might not agree with them or not, some people out there, I have JJ McCarthy at QB 11. Which it might be aggressive. So like maybe that's aggressive for some, like when they're thinking of him. So then what I did is I looked and I saw, I went to Dynasty, Keep Trade Cut, Fantasy Calc, wherever you want to go. And like he's sitting around QB 14, which was higher than I thought he would be. So like part of me is like, well, maybe I am ahead on consensus, and I'm okay being ahead on consensus with what I think his perceived outcome could be, his range of outcomes there. So if I'm at QB 11 and then someone in my league has, Kyler or Brock or Love or Stroud or any of those guys that I have maybe lower than him, I can maybe make a deal for this. And I might be able to get something plus on the other side where that would be a plus for me. Like I think I'm getting a plus back, a JJ plus, and then whoever quarterback they are. And that's okay. Now, on the face value in the league, they might think I lost it, right? You might get those emojis on Sleeper. Everybody's telling you're an idiot. Like that might happen. But for me, that's a win because from a value perspective in particular rankings, I agree with what that was. Now, if they plug that trade into a trade calculator, I'm going to win too, because they're going to look at it and say, oh, I'm getting more value, right? Because of the way they're ranked on that particular calculator too. So like, to me, I use the trade calculator to identify guys that I value higher and then manipulate the league mates into thinking, hey, they're getting a good deal too, because they're going to plug it into some kind of calculator. Maybe some of our patrons will plug it into ours. We have our own calculator too. And from my experience there, sometimes when I plug trades in the calculator, I'm like, I don't know if I agree with this one. It's our own calculator, right? Like, and it's hard. Now, what's combined, it does Devy and Dynasty too. So that can be kind of weird with values. But to me, trade calculators are necessary. They're not bad. Like, I do think that they can be very reactionary, like the rankings week to week. And I don't think they should be as reactionary as they are in certain websites out there. Ours aren't that reactionary. Maybe ours should be a little bit more reactionary if you ask some people, because we don't update them as fast as weekly. But I still think there's a need for them. And I think it still shows you market value, right? Now, you're still going to know your league value, though. So, like, that's where it also comes into play, is understanding your league mates, tendencies, trades, those type of things. And that's always going to dictate and overshadow any calculator. But it's still a good base. Like, okay, where are these guys at? How do I use them there? I think they get misused because everybody tries to win a deal. And winning a deal in April and winning a deal next April, those are two very different things. Like what they could look like, what they do. What you should always do is just try to make your team better. And if you do think it makes it better based on the values that you have for that particular player, then go for it, right? Just use it as like kind of overarching tool.
Yeah, two comments on that. If you are new to Dynasty, you need to be using these things because a lot of people that are watching this show probably have been around the bend on playing in Dynasty leagues. But if you're new to Dynasty, this will help you because a lot of times you come from redraft world, and the way you value redraft is completely different than the way you value Dynasty. A lot of age goes into Dynasty that doesn't go into redraft. So use these things. And the second point here, try and trade at consensus. Try and make these trades equal. That's what, if you're going through those negotiations, if you can find a way to come to an equal balance on these things where we all sort of agree, then you'll get deals done. A lot of times in these leagues, what I see is, you're trying to win the trade. You're looking at the trade calculator. You're instead of trying to win, you're not trying to get the best deal. You're not trying to make your team better. You're just trying to win that game. that trade. And that's where I feel like we talked about is sort of the big misuse. So trade at market values, trade at what, the consensus is. And if you're new, definitely try and use these things because they'll help you kind of get an idea of moving from that redraft mindset to that dynasty mindset.
Yeah, no, 100%. And that's really where it comes from. So like, I think this is fact. I think that they're good, but they are misused, right? So how do you use them and go through it? And then use multiple too. You can use multiple sites out there. You can use our Patreon trade calculator. You can go through it and just see, okay, where are these values at? How do they shift there? All right, let's get into some running back strategy myths. Just really one here, but I'm sure we'll talk about a few in total. And this is a great question. Andrew Metcalf gave it to us. He's a great guy on social media. Go follow him at DrewMet_FF. He just talks all dynasties, and he's a dynasty nut. So his question was, it's okay, or his myth or theory, it's okay to acquire or hold running backs during a rebuild. I love this one because me and Jay have talked about this already. We've mentioned this multiple times when we talk about dynasty, is that I've really flipped my whole avenue or strategy here of how to do this. I am okay with this. This is a fact. It is okay to hold running backs during a rebuild, in my opinion, because, if I'm drafting, if I'm have a rebuild this team, retooling team there, but I have some young stun running backs, why do I need to feel obligated to trade them? Like, what's the point of like moving them off? Just because I'm rebuilding doesn't mean I need to just, sell for the, whatever asset. What asset are you looking for, right? Like it depends on obviously the asset you're going to get back there, but I shouldn't feel obligated. Like there's this kind of note out there. It's like, you don't have any running backs on your roster ever, where I would argue like, you got to be competitive at some point. You're going to need running backs. Like that's just the reality. Like you need stud young running backs to be competitive there. Now, if you can get a lot of first for them, if you can really churn and do those things, I get it, but it's okay to hold them. And I think it's actually okay to hold some veterans too, because they add value. Like everybody needs running backs by week 9. Like everybody needs them. Like everybody's like dying out here trying to find running backs. They're freaking getting all these dudes off the waivers for 150 fab, like trying to find that next guy that's coming up. I remember Rivers, remember the Rivers, LA Ram guy. I remember he was going for a lot because there was injuries ahead of him. Like, and then he got like one carry, right? Like we've talked about these guys all the time. Like, where are these guys coming from? So for me, like, this is a fact. It's okay to hold running backs. It's okay to like go out there and be aggressive. And I would even argue like in trades when you're retooling or rebuilding, getting them to throw in some veteran guys, like maybe you're like an older guy, maybe just like a throw in there if you're giving up somebody, like getting that running back value back is not a bad thing. Like obviously there's always risk involved because someone could get injured, right? They tear their ACL, they can whatever that happens there. But in my opinion, though, so can wide receivers. And because the position is so volatile, you never know who's going to pop up in value, right? And there's so many wide receivers. Think about how many wide receiver 3s and 4s are out there right now. Even 5s and 6s that think they could be wide receiver 3s. There's so many that if you hit on some of these running backs, they're going to have way more value than these wide receivers on your roster too on the bottom of it. So I love this. I think this is a fact. I think that, it's okay to acquire hold running backs now. It shouldn't be like in vogue anymore or however you want to call it. Like this is an actual proven strategy I think more people should implement.
Yeah, I agree. I think rebuild and productive struggle doesn't necessarily mean don't hold any running backs. That's not what it is. It's about increasing value with each transaction, each thing you can do. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't hold your running backs through that process. Now, I would say that there's a little bit of difference. Now, if you're going to hold the aging veteran running back, the Derrick Henry, the Kamara, and you want to hold them to maximize the value. So you want to trade right before the trade deadline, trade right before the playoffs to get that first or whatever. That's a maximizing value opportunity. But the only way you can do that is if you're holding on to those guys that people are going to feel are the most valuable, and you sell it to them at the max value point.
Yeah.
Now, like Kevin said, you can acquire those guys probably pretty cheap during the offseason and then sell them for a lot more expensive when they need them right before the playoffs. So that from that perspective is a very value generating type of things. Now you need certain circumstances within the league. You need a very active league. You need to know that people are going to be on the market for those types of players when the time comes. But we probably don't want to be, if you're trying to make those value enhancing moves, you probably don't want to be holding the bag and not being able to get rid of them at a certain time, because that was then you're going to get this depreciating running back. But
Yeah.
if you're going through that productive struggle and you can get a whole bunch of backup running backs or running backs that are young that have the potential to increase tremendously in value, like how cheap was Chuba Hubbard, how cheap was Chase Brown, and how much of those guys increased in value over those times. Those are probably very cheap assets to acquire at the time. You could have held them, appreciated a lot, and then make a very value enhancing strategy there by selling them at a certain point. Just keep adding that value over and over again. And you can do that with running backs. It does not have to be just quarterbacks and wide receivers. You can also do that with running backs throughout your process. It does not mean you have to go zero running back, and whatever that means, because zero running back isn't necessarily a zero running back from that perspective. You usually can most of those zero running backs teams have at least one dynamite running back in those for the strategy. So yeah, definitely. I feel like this is a fact. I would just say the nuance is make sure you're kind of making those value enhancing plays, and there's even ways to do that with the older players. And you just want to keep building, keep getting value with each of those things, and you can definitely do that for the running back position as well.
Yeah, and I think you made good points. I think the other thing too, when you think of running backs, they are the older running backs have gained more value the last 3 years than I've seen in Dynasty ever before. So you're starting to see guys like Joe Mixon hold their value. Even Nick Chubb holds value. Like Nick Chubb out here, Jay, he's clinging to life out here of all the injuries and all that stuff, right? Like he's holding value there. CMC's bouncing back. Like now people are talking themselves back into CMC being a first round redraft pick. And I say redraft, but that's okay, because when you see their value go up in redraft, that means their immediate dynasty value goes up too. That's also a good way to look at sometimes, is looking at redraft rankings and seeing where those running backs are, because if they're higher than, like, they're obviously going to be higher than dynasty because no one drafts those running backs in the first 3-5 rounds. But if you use redraft rankings and see where they are, that means their this year's value is up. That's a good tool to use. So like you're seeing all these older prospects, man, I don't mind taking some shots on some guys, as long as you're not giving up the capital that, the stuff out there. Like you got to be cognitive of it. Don't go buy Derrick Henry right now for a first, right? We know that. But there is an avenue to kind of use running backs. So that's a great question. I really like that question there. All right, next one's about consistency. So we say this too, and it was funny when I read this, I started laughing because I always talk about consistency, or like the floor, right? We talk about the floor, the ceiling, and those type of things for guys. So this question, or this myth, or theory out there, is consistency really consistent year over year, and does it even matter if it is, right? And so this is an interesting question, so I'm gonna let you answer it first, or kind of dive into it, and then we'll go from there.
I'd say with caveat, but I'd say mostly myth. But there's the exception, is the elite. So the elite QBs, the elite wide receivers, the elite running backs, however many that is, that might not be very many, but those guys will probably have consistency year over year. But not only is it consistency at a certain level, it's consistency at a very, very high elite points per game level. Mm-hmm. And so I would say in that situation, yeah, that matters, because Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, they're going to score 20 points per game for the next however many years. And that is incredibly important to win you a dynasty championship. So I'd say at the very, very elite level, Jamar Chase, as long as he's playing with Joe Burrow, will probably score you a ton of fantasy points. So those guys, I think, yes, it matters. But from the other perspective, no, I don't think that that matters. Usually when we talk about consistency, we're talking about not the elite, not the spikes, not that. We're talking about the guys that get you the like position level 2 type of points per game year in, year out. That's what we're kind of doing. Some people move up a little bit, some people move down, some people have the capability to get into the wide receiver 1, but really the consistency that we're probably talking about is the guys that are the 13, 14 points per game guys that do that every single year. And does that really even matter? I'm not sure. It kind of feels replaceable. Those type of guys kind of feel like you can kind of move one in, move one out, and that'll be fine. But when you get to the playoffs, you kind of want those guys that have the higher range of outcomes that can really get you the amount of points that you want to try and win. So I'd say kind of a myth, except for the elite players. That's probably pretty important.
Yeah. No, so here's my question to you, because this is an interesting question, because I've gone into the point where, like, I'm very, especially with the running back position, I'm very like, what can you do for me tomorrow, next week, in week 1, week 2, week 3? Like,
Yeah.
that's with running backs, that's where I'm really concerned with, right? Like, hey, what can you give me in these next 2 or 3 weeks? Wide receivers. So, I mean, I understand quarterbacks. Yes, quarterbacks, to me, you want to be more consistent. Like, to me, I want more of a safer floor for quarterbacks. Right now, where does that floor come from? I think it's rushing. That's why I tend to rank rushing quarterbacks a little higher, because I do think they have a higher floor there in terms of the consistency matters. But wide receivers are tough for me. And tight ends are so volatile that I don't really think we need to talk about tight ends that much on that. But wide receivers, to me, like, when you're thinking of what, because even when I go through, so for example, when I'm going through wide receivers, or I'm going to start up and I'm like, all right, I just need a refresher on how this guy finished a year out. There are some guys that get ranked very high that week point per game weekly, like, they are not very good down the stretch of the season, right? Like, a guy like Zay Flowers is an interesting case. Like, we go through Zay's numbers and you're kind of looking like how he finished. I mean, he's only like, what, he's a wide receiver 2, right? We can agree that Zay Flowers is a wide receiver 2 value. But like, when you go through his numbers and you're going through like his weekly finishes and all of that stuff, like, it's wide receiver 40 finish, wide receiver 45 finish, wide receiver 12 finish, wide receiver 30 finish. Like, so, how do you dictate wide receivers to you then? Like, are you just trying to get in that elite? Like I talk about all the time, like, hey, you want to try to get in the top 15? Like, do you just get up there, those elite assets there? But how does that help you? Do you care about consistency with wide receivers? What do you look for?
Yeah. Well, if I'm really trying to find, I'm trying to find the guys that have the potential to get into that elite category, even if they are consistent. I want to have them to have the potential, the ability to get into, because you look, most of the stuff that we do is kind of looking backwards. This is what they've done the last few years from a points per game basis. But stuff changes. Like, you have a new quarterback, you have a new coach, you have a new offensive system. Stuff changes from year to year. What's most important, like you mentioned, is week 1 next week, but next year. But what's most important is the projection, not necessarily what he's done, but if that's changing. So, Zay Flowers being, a 13 point per game person, is he going to be a 14 point per game person? Is he going to be a 15? Does he have the potential to be a 15 point basis, or 15 points per game basis, based on projections, based on who's moved in, who's moved out, of the offense? So from that perspective, I want to have my best guess of these wide receivers, of what I think the future will hold based on all those changes, all those things. And that's where consistency comes in. You have some players that, no matter how things are changing around, they're going to get you your wide receiver 2 numbers. Whether like it's incredibly favorable for them, those changes, or pretty negative for them, those changes, he'll still kind of get those wide receiver 2 numbers. And then you have some players that, we're projecting wide receiver 2, but there's a potential for them to get to that upper tier. Somehow they have the ability to, whether they showed that from college production, whether they've showed based on splits, however you want to look at it, they have this ability that there could be an elite level type of performance here from them, where they can get up a tier somehow. Those are the guys I want to kind of target out of my big group of maybe consistent players. Who are those guys that can jump up a tier? Those are the guys that I want from a consistency perspective.
All right. No, I like that. No, I agree. I agree with you too. I'm just a very like, what can you give me next week, buddy? Like, that's kind of how I feel like, especially the running back position. Wide receiver is tough. Like, we can go through the rankings of the wide receiver spot. Like right now, keep Drake cut. Wide receiver, Xavier Worthy's at 25, Metcalf 26, Waddle 27, Olave 28, Pickens 29, DJ Moore 30, Terry McLaurin 31. Like, and I can just keep going. But of that group, it's hard to really separate those guys, right? Like, and if you're looking at it from a consistency standpoint, I usually, how I lean, and you might do it differently. Okay, which one of those guys is a wide receiver 1? All right. But when you go through it, Xavier's not, so that knocks him off. DK is, but he's in a terrible offense. Jalen Waddle's a wide receiver 2. Olave is a wide receiver 1, but he's 1 concussion away from never playing football again. Pickens is a wide receiver 2. Moore, I don't know. DJ Moore, I'm not sure. And then Terry McLaurin is a wide receiver 31. So the way I look at that deal, it's like, man, do you go on upside where Olave consistently when the first 2 seasons you're like, hey, this kid could do it and he had it? Or do you go more on like, hey, Terry McLaurin and Jaden Daniels for 2 more years may have more overall fantasy points for the next 2 years, right? So I think that's the question I have. Maybe that's where consistency throws in, or just maybe continuity within the offense. I think maybe that all comes into play too. I think it's an interesting question. But for me, I think it matters to a point, but I think that maybe consistency within a system matters more than what they put on the field. Maybe just that's how I look at it, or consistency with their quarterback. Think of the DJ Moores of the world that we've never, the quarterback issue, the Garrett Wilsons now. Like those things matter, I think, a little bit more than people, want to say. All right, let's get into the last 2 here. Superflex strategy miss here. So just some Superflex questions here. If you guys don't know what a Superflex is, that is where you can start 2 quarterbacks, but you don't have to. You can start a position player in that flex spot, but it gives you an option to start that quarterback. I always like to mention that just in case you don't know. Now, so here's a question too that lead us into it. You need to start a QB in Superflex spot to win. What do you think, Jay?
Well, clearly you don't, because if you have a player that's going to score more points than the really back end QB2 that you got, you're going to start him there. Anytime that you have a player, if you have enough extra flexes at wide receiver and running back that you can put a 15 points per gamer in there, and you got a really bad QB2 that's 13 point per gamer guy, you play the guy with the higher points per game. Of course you can do that. But in all reality, QBs score more points in most leagues than on a more consistent basis than the wide receiver and running back positions. So in all reality, if you can get a second QB in there that scores 16, 17 points per game, it's probably better than the wide receiver or running back that you can get that's probably scoring 13 points per game because he's your 5th flex that you're trying to stick him in there. But clearly, if you have a really bad QB2, you're going to play that running back. You're going to play that wide receiver. And if you really go the bad QB route, your best players might be the wide receivers and the running backs and the tight ends. And so you might want to be sticking them in there. And yeah, for sure, sometimes that'll work. But in reality, QBs score more points than running backs and wide receivers. Just generally, most of the time, you probably want both of those spots to be filled by QBs. Probably gives you the best shot to win. But there are certain situations where you can figure out, you have a QB that for that week or for the season isn't scoring in the top 24 of all the points per game. You might have an extra wide receiver. You might have a extra tight end or running back that you can flex, and they outscore that player. It just kind of depends on your strategy. But yeah, most of the time I'd want to put that the second QB in there.
Yeah, no, I'm on the same page with you. I do think that the one area where I think maybe you can get away with it sometimes is in tight end premium leagues. If it's a pretty heavy tight end premium, let's say 2, and you have a top 5 guy, right? But it's still volatile. Like the tight end position is very interesting. But if you could put Brock and McBride in there, if you have that, maybe possibly. I do think the floor though argument, the QB is really where it's at because you have those things. I've started some pretty nasty players in the second Superflex spot though, Jay. Last year I started Taysom Hill because I was just injuries abound before he got injured. And I remember tweeting out well, I'm starting Hill today, and he scored 18 points or something stupid. Some reason I should not have won. But I have definitely started. But the only reason why I felt comfortable is because he could get some QB reps in there. He was getting those guys. So you can start guys in there. I do think that I don't know if you can. I think you need a lot of help to win. You need a lot of help to win. So I would say this is fact. Unless you get lucky somehow, you get the guys in there, or you just build a super team, and then you just have this super team that you just have in there that you can get guys in there. All right, next one, and then we'll wrap this one up. In Superflex, you must draft a quarterback in the first 2 rounds to compete. So this, when you're looking at this, this used to be a very common theme out there. So when you're thinking of how do you build a roster? What's that roster look like? Those type of things. This was very common. Startup ADP, you're going to see that right now. Here are kind of the quarterbacks going in those first 2 rounds right now. You got Josh Allen, Jaden Daniels, Joe Burrow, Jalen Hurts. Then you going all the way to, then you have Justin Herbert in that range, Patrick Mahomes, Caleb Williams. And really honestly, Drake May, CJ Stroud, kind of like those are the guys going in the first 2 rounds. But there's a lot of guys, and you're getting like QB2s pretty late in the process now. We talked about a little bit a couple weeks ago, but Dak at QB 21 going maybe 5th or 6th round. Justin Fields is down there. Tua's down there. So some will say, hey, we want those guys. So basically, would you rather start with like Josh Allen, Drake May, or Josh Allen and then later with Dak, right? Like these are the kind of questions that you have. So I think this is fiction now. I don't think you need to draft two QBs in the first 2 rounds. But where are you at?
I think, well, I would say no, you definitely don't have to draft 2 QBs in the first 2 rounds. So that's definitely not the case. If for whatever reason this never happens, but if you could get 220 plus points per game guys in the first round, that might be a differentiator. You should definitely do that. But do you have to do that? No, probably don't. And the thing is that there are so many values you can get from a points per game perspective later on. A lot of players in that 18 points per game range that you can get much, much further down and still outperform other players at running back and wide receivers by taking those guys first. So you get sort of the positional value there but you got Kyler Murray, Justin Herbert, Brock Purdy, Bo Nix, Baker Mayfield. You talked about Dak Prescott around 17 points per game. There's a whole other realm of players at 17 points per game. So like there's a way to compete. That's the nature of this question. Can you compete? Yes, you can compete with players that score really good points per game that you can get much, much later than having to take maybe that reach in the second round on a player. I mean, you mentioned CJ Stroud. I like him. I think I got him a high dynasty perspective. I got Drake May, high dynasty perspective, but are they going to put you in the 18, 20 points per game? Maybe. They might range. And so you could get maybe 3, 4, 5 rounds later, you can get guys that are already scoring in that 18 points per game, 19 points per game range. And that really helps you compete if you want to take that strategy. So I think it's kind of a myth. I think you can go full out wide receiver, running back, tight end in the first few rounds and then hit quarterback later. But what I would say is those differentiated quarterbacks, the 20 plus points per game quarterbacks, you probably want to select those in Dynasty Superflex guys, because those are the guys that have retained the value and also help you win because they offer you 3, 4, 5 points over positional value on a week to week basis. So those guys are the guys that you really need to have, and you select those guys. But can you build from a wide receiver, running back, tight end? For sure. And there's plenty of quarterback points per gamers that are much further down that you can select later.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that gone are the days of like having to get those 2 early. I think that was a strategy used a couple of years ago, probably 3 or 4 years ago. Like, hey, this is how you go. I truly don't believe if you wait on that second quarterback to really get a high floor guy like Dak, Baker, like those guys. Like I get very concerned about the Jordan Loves. Like, and I know we have a Jordan Love truther on YouTube that yells at us every time we talk about Jordan Love. But I worry about like what that floor looks like in terms of at the quarterback position, who you're drafting there, because if you still get a top guy, like one of the top 5 guys, and then go down and get someone else, I do think that's an interesting strategy. So, for example, in a startup that me and Jay are in, I end up getting Joe Burrow, and then I grabbed Trevor Lawrence. And now, of course, right before I was going to draft Kyler or JJ of these guys, but these guys took them. So like I kind of got left with one last scrap. Now I'm concerned about Trevor Lawrence, but if he hits his ceiling in that offense, I'm okay having a Burrow and a Lawrence as my 2 quarterbacks in terms of what that looks like. So those are some of the myths out there that we kind of went over. Do you have anything else in terms of dynasty myths or dynasty, maybe like, rules or stuff that people talk about that you maybe wanted to mention or anything like that?
No, nothing to add right here, but what I would say is, those guys are actually me, because I traded ahead of you, and I got Kyler Murray, and I traded up for JJ. So that was actually just me that did that to you. Sorry. Yeah, no, I think, fantasy football for me is about having fun. I want to make sure that, in Dynasty that I'm always making value enhancing moves. I'm not trying to rip people off. I'm trying to actually get trades done. If you play in any leagues with me, you'll know that I'll be one of the guys that actually does trade, and it's because I want to work with people. I want to find out what they need and figure out what I need, and I want to try and get deals done. And you do that by establishing trust and trading like consensus, and that's how you have fun, and you just try and play. And the point that we started off the show was there's a whole bunch of like atoms that everybody either kind of thinks are absolute or anything like that. And
Yeah.
I think we went through a lot of these things, and for most of them, we're like, yeah, but we'd always offer sort of a caveat, but kind of this thing. And there are always exceptions to most rules. And when you're going through it, just feel like you can feel confident that you can kind of zag when people are zigging. And if everybody believes this one thing, you can try a different strategy, try it a little differently. So keep up those value enhancing moves. Not everything is tried and true in fact. You can kind of challenge those myths, or you can challenge those misperceptions, and play Dynasty the way you want it to. It's supposed to be fun. Play with your friends, have a good time, and just use all those tools that are out there to try and help you win.
I love Jay. I love when he goes on his like rants of like everybody be happy, like just in terms of like we're gonna do this, we're gonna work hard, do this. The one thing I will say, he's right. There's nuance to all of these myths and stuff, and some of them are true and some of them aren't. The other kind of little strategy piece like I do for you right now is go through those those rankings, those tools, whatever you have out there, and go find some veterans getting underpriced out there. Like go find some guys out there that you can maybe churn and add to your rosters. I think this is a good time to do that right now, in the dog days of June, July, late June and going into July, right before training camps kick off, right, and do all that stuff. And go sign up for our Substack. We got some fun stuff planned in terms of this month. We have projections dropping this week. We have new rankings dropping this week. But we are going to do some bunch of stuff with training camp news, get you guys caught up, a bunch of redraft stuff we're excited for you guys this year to have. So go check that out. And we'll be back next week. We'll be talking I don't know what we're talking yet. We'll figure that out as we go. We're gonna give you a couple more episodes here as we're getting closer here to training camp. And before you know it, we'll be watching Browns, whoever, Raiders Thursday night complaining. But we're getting close, y'all. We're getting very close to the football season. So we appreciate you guys. We'll check you guys in the next show.